In July 1776, a Philadelphia printer prepared a page Britain could treat as treason. It did not show a battlefield. It explained why the colonies believed they had the right to leave. That was the problem. By 1776, resistance had already crossed into open revolt, but fighting could only begin a break. It could not explain one. Before America could become independent, it had to answer a harder question. By what right? Independence was voted on July 2nd. The words explaining it were adopted on July 4th. The break mattered. The written case put the break before the world. By 1776, the relationship between Britain and its colonies had been breaking for years. Taxes, troops, a closed port, petitions, protests, pamphlets, and punishments had turned loyalty into suspicion. Many colonists still thought of themselves as subjects of the crown, defending what they understood as British rights. They were not simply asking whether a king was kind. They were asking whether power could rule them without their consent. That argument moved through taverns, assemblies, newspapers, churches, town meetings, and crowded streets. Paper became part of the struggle. Petitions crossed the Atlantic, pamphlets passed from hand to hand, and resolutions moved from colony to colony. Before independence became official, it had to become thinkable. But there was danger in saying it plainly. A protest might be forgiven. A rebellion might be crushed. A declaration would be remembered. In June 1776, the Continental Congress met inside the Pennsylvania State House in Philadelphia. It was not a shrine yet. It was a working building, hot, crowded, and full of paper. Outside the room, British power was not an idea in a book. Armies were moving, ships were gathering. Defeat could mean prison, ruin, or hanging. On June 7th, Richard Henry Lee of Virginia put the central issue before Congress. The colonies, he argued, should be free and independent states. The vote did not come immediately. Some delegates needed instructions from home. Others feared moving too fast. So the delegates did something revealing. They did not only debate the decision, they began preparing its argument. Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Roger Sherman, and Robert Livingston were appointed to draft the words. If Congress was going to break with an empire, it needed more than courage. It needed a case. Jefferson did most of the writing. He was 33, careful with language, and working in Philadelphia with a portable writing desk. But the Declaration was not one man inventing America alone in a room. It drew from arguments already alive across the colonies, older claims about liberty, local grievances, state instructions, and the Virginia Declaration of Rights. Years of petitions, sermons, pamphlets, and political debate had prepared the ground. Jefferson's gift was compression. He took a scattered crisis and gave it a structure. First, a principle. People have rights, and governments exist to protect them. Government power comes from the consent of the governed. Then, a test. When a government becomes destructive of those purposes, people may change it. Then, evidence. The Declaration listed grievances against King George III, like charges meant for the world to judge. Representative governments obstructed, trade cut off, troops kept among the people, taxes imposed without consent, trial by jury denied. The language had music, but its purpose was proof. The Declaration was not handed down whole. It was drafted, revised, softened, sharpened, and shaped through disagreement. Adams and Franklin suggested changes. Congress made more. Some edits cleaned the language, others made it more cautious. The most revealing edits showed that even a founding moment was still made by human beings in a difficult room. The words were larger than the world that produced them. America in 1776 had not yet lived the full meaning of equality. That, too, belongs in the story. But it does not make the Declaration smaller. It helps explain why the Declaration endured. The country began with words higher than its own condition, and they gave future generations something to return to, argue from, and grow toward. 2 days before the Declaration was adopted, Congress approved independence. That was the legal break. John Adams believed July 2nd would be celebrated with bells, bonfires, and illuminations. He was almost right. But the date that survived was not the vote. It was the explanation. That is the heart of the story. July 2nd made the break. July 4th made the case. America remembers the day independence was given words the world could hear. After Congress adopted the text, it went to a Philadelphia printer named John Dunlap. He printed broadside copies, large sheets meant to be posted, carried, read, and reprinted. Most people did not first encounter the Declaration as a national treasure. They encountered it as a page still moving through the country. Folded, posted, copied, and read aloud, the document traveled by horse, wagon, ship, newspaper, and human voice. It crossed roads and rivers into taverns, homes, churches, military camps, newspapers, and political offices. It told loyalists, patriots, officials, soldiers, and ordinary families that the conflict had changed. The colonies were no longer asking to restore the old relationship. They were claiming a separate place among the powers of the earth. That was why the printed page mattered. A private decision could be denied. A public argument had to be answered. The famous signatures came later. On July 19th, Congress ordered an official parchment copy. On August 2nd, many delegates began signing it. Others signed later. Eventually, 56 names stood beneath the words, and John Hancock's signature became the most famous, partly because it is impossible to miss. But every name carried risk. The signers were lawyers, merchants, planters, physicians, ministers, and public men. They were not marble statues. They were human beings, with courage, interests, contradictions, and consequences. Signing did not make victory certain. It made responsibility visible. A name beneath the words turned agreement into evidence. And in a revolution, evidence could be dangerous. The Declaration did not become the operating manual of the United States. That work would belong to constitutions, laws, courts, elections, and institutions. The Declaration became something different, a measuring stick. Again and again, Americans returned to it when the country had to ask what its founding words required. Abolitionists, including Frederick Douglass, held its promise against slavery and reminded the nation that celebration carries responsibility. Women at Seneca Falls echoed its structure to demand rights of their own. Abraham Lincoln reached back to its equality sentence during a war over whether the nation could survive. The Declaration endured because it gave Americans something more powerful than nostalgia. It gave them a standard, not because the founders had solved everything, because they left behind a promise large enough for the country to keep growing into. Today, the Declaration is faded and carefully protected. The ink is weak. The paper is fragile. The argument is not. Its story is not the story of flawless men handing down untouchable truth. It is the story of political power having to explain itself in public. A rebellion can say, "We are leaving," A declaration has to say, "Here is why." That difference changed everything. Because once a nation explains itself through rights, consent, equality, and government by the people, those words do not belong only to the generation that wrote them. They belong to everyone who inherits them. 2.5 centuries later, the Declaration still asks America to remember why independence mattered. Not because the country began perfectly, because it began with a reason. A reason written down, printed, carried, read aloud, signed, at real risk, and handed forward. In 1776, a dangerous page gave America a public voice. Then, that voice outgrew the room. And every 4th of July, beneath the bells, flags, fireworks, and light, the old promise is still there. A country built on liberty must keep learning how to honor it. From wet ink to a living promise, you are always welcome here at Illumentary.